Thank you very much. Let me welcome you to MedZone African Motives. Uh, Today, I want us to look at Economic and Management Science Grade 8, EMS Grade 8, Term 3 notes, whereby we are going to talk about entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship, we are going to be under entrepreneurship chapter. That is where we are in today's presentation. So let us be together, good people. Let us make sure that we are together from the start and to the end of this chapter or of this presentation. So let's quickly go to forms of business ownership under entrepreneurship. So as we are going to talk about forms of business ownership, we know very well that we have many forms of business ownership. But in today's presentation, we are going to be mainly looking at sole trader. We are going to look at sole trader. That's where we are going to be busy off in this presentation. So as it says, learners should know key concepts. So the key concept that you have to know, the meaning of the words form of ownership. Form of ownership. So a form of ownership is a legal way business is owned and managed. I'm saying in this word, the legal way a business is owned, a business is owned and managed. That is that. So it determines who owns the business, who makes decisions, how profits are shared, who is responsible for this. So that is that. Also, learners should know or should be able to distinguish between different forms of ownership, namely sole trader, partnership, close corporation, public and private companies. Like I've said, that we are going to be on sole trader is one of the forms of a business ownership. So we are first going to start with sole trader in this presentation. So that is that. So it also says, as it have said, you are to know the forms of business ownership with regard the characteristics, advantages, and disadvantages of each form of ownership. So that is that. Also, it says business role in suitable job creation and sustainable use of natural resources. So this is what we want the learners to know at the end of this chapter, entrepreneurship. So that is that. Let us move on. So now we are on key concepts that you are to know uh, in this chapter, entrepreneurship. So we have legal entity. As they are saying, it is responsible for all actions when you are allowed to enter into contracts or clear indication of what belongs to business and what belongs to owner. That is that. So we're talking about what a legal entity. So when you talk of legal entity, good people, that is a legal entity is a business that is a business that is recognized by law as separate from its owners. Get me straight. Legal entity is a business that is recognized by law. It must be recognized by law when you say that is a legal entity as separate from its owners. So it can own property, enter into contracts, should and can be also be issued in its own name. That's the legal entity. So, meaning in short, with legal entity, that it means business exists separately. It means business exists separately from its owners. Separately from its owners. from its owners. So that is that in short. Also, we are going to talk about liability. As you said, liability is all about who will be responsible for the debt of the business and who will pay them. Who will be responsible for the debt and who will pay the debt. So that is what liability. We are talking about responsibility for business debts. Responsibility for business debts. Responsibility for business debts. So that is that. So it means that when you're talking about that liability, is that liability refers who is responsible for paying the debts of the business. So that is that. Then we have a limited liability. As it says, the owners are not personally responsible. Owners of the company, owners of the business, owners of the partnership. Limited liability applies on companies, on those corporations. So that is that, what will come to that. But what this means is that the owners are not personally responsible for debts of the business. Owners will only lose their investment in business. That is what liability. So it says owners only lose what? Owners only lose their investment. Only lose their investment. Owners only lose their investment. That is when we're talking about what? Limited liability. So owners are not personally responsible. They are not personally responsible. That is what you're saying. Owners are not personally responsible. They are not personally responsible for business debts. So they can only lose the money they invested in the business. That is what they will lose. But if the business now is to pay their debts, that is for the business, not the owners. Because this is a separate legal entity. So that is that. So let us move on to unlimited now liability. So here we have what? Unlimited liability. As they are saying, the owners could lose their personal possessions to repay any debt. So here owners, they are to lose their personal possessions to repay the debts if the business is to pay debts. So that is that. That is unlimited liabilities. Owners may lose assets to pay debts. Owners may lose personal debt, personal assets to pay debts. So if with unlimited, it simply says the owners of the business are going to pay with their personal assets if they are owing the creditors, they are owing suppliers. So they are going to pay with their personal assets if ever they fail to pay. So their personal assets will be taken. That is unlimited liability. That is unlimited liability. Owners are personally responsible for this. They are personally responsible for this and may lose personal debts to repay their creditors. That is that. Then we have continuity. With continuity says the existence of the business. Continuity, existence of the business. The business continues to exist despite changes in ownership. So it means continuity refers to ability of a business to continue existing even when owners or management changes. That is why we are saying the business continues to exist. Despite what? Despite changes in ownership. Despite um, despite changes, despite changes in ownership. So that is that. The existence of the business. It means the business is going to continue. The business is going to continue despite changes in ownership. That is continuity. That's what we mean by continuity. For example, a public company continues operating even if some shareholders sell their shares or die. The business is not going to die. It continues to, to exist. Unlike one-man business, like we're talking about sole trade, we're talking about sole proprietor. If he dies, it means the business also dies. But with this, with companies, if the shareholder sells his shares or dies, the business is still going to continue. So that is why we're saying despite changes in ownership. Now we have formalities. We have formalities. As it says, formalities, legal requirements in terms of documentation and other procedures. That is formalities, legal document and procedures required by law. We are talking about legal documents when we talk of these legal documents and procedures required by law. Required by law. So that is what we're going to talk about the formalities. So it means that formalities are the legal requirements, documents and procedures needed to start and operate a business. So that is that. For example, we can talk of a private company. Private company must be registered. Keep financial records, submit required documents to relevant authorities. Those are the formalities that we are talking about. So let us move on. So here we are on this where it says to determine the forms of ownership, an entrepreneur would like to start. He or she need to take the following factors into consideration. Take the following factors into consideration. So for you to know which form of ownership you are going for, there are factors that will help you. The size of the business. The size of the business. The size of the business helps determine the most suitable form of ownership. So it helps because the size of business helps determine the most suitable type, the most suitable form of business, the most suitable form of business ownership, form of ownership. So that is that, the size of the business. Because we know very well small business often choose simpler forms. Small business simply choose what? Simpler forms. While large business may need a company structure. That is that. For example, a small tech shop may operate as a sole trader, while a large retail chain may operate as a public company. That is what we are saying. Size of the business is one of the factors that you are to take into consideration when you want to choose the form of ownership. Then the other one, how much capital will you need? How much capital will you need? Different forms of ownership have different abilities to raise money. Different forms of ownership have different abilities. They have different abilities to raise money. Have different abilities to raise money. So that's that. Different forms of ownership. Different forms of ownership have different abilities to raise money. So some can only use the owner's funds, while others can attract investors. That is what we're talking about different abilities, different abilities. Some they can use their own pension. Some they can use their money, they can borrow from friends, but others can attract what? Investors. For example, a sole trader may use personal savings, while a public company can raise capital by selling shares to the public. So you see, that is that. So now we can come to legal requirements. Legal requirements. So with legal requirements, some forms of ownership have legal requirements, while others require registration and compliance with laws. So that's that. So we are saying some forms of ownership, some forms of ownership have different ability, have what? Have few legal requirements, sorry. Some forms of ownership have few legal requirements. Legal requirements. While others require registration, while others require registration, registration, and compliance with laws. And compliance with law. And compliance with laws. So that is that. For example, a partnership is relatively easy to start, while private company LTD, private proprietary limited, must be registered according to company laws. That is why we say some forms of ownership have few legal requirements, like partnership, as we are saying, it is easy to start it. But when it comes to private company, now is supposed to be registered according to company laws. That's when we're talking about it require what? Registration. And they're supposed to comply with laws. That is that. So that is one of the factors that you have to make sure that you put it into consideration that even if you want to start a company, know that it's going to need you some registration. There are compliances that you have to go for. So that is very important. This is one of the factors that can help you to know which form of ownership are you going for. Let us come to amount of tax to be paid. Amount of tax to be paid. So you find that different forms of ownership may be taxed differently, affecting the business profit. Get me straight. I'm saying different forms of ownership, different forms of ownership may be taxed differently. May be taxed differently. May be taxed differently, affecting a business profits. Affecting business profits. That is that. So they are taxed differently. So, for example, a sole trader's business income is usually taxed as part of owner's personal income, while a company pays corporate tax. So that is that. Then the other factor is who receive all profits. Who receive all profits? That is another factor that you have to put into consideration when you start a business, so that you will be able to know which form of ownership you are going for. Who receives all profits? The form of ownership determines how profits are shared among owners. So that is that. For example, in a sole trader, the owner receives all profits, but in a partnership, profits are shared among partners according to their agreement. So hope we understand that. Then the other one says, who is responsible for debts of the business? Who is responsible for the debts of the business? The form of ownership determines whether owners are personally responsible for debts. That is that. The form of ownership is going to determine whether owners are personally responsible for debts. That is that, for example, in a sole trader, owner is personally responsible for all debts. But in a private company, shareholders generally have limited liability. That is that. Now let's come to the last one. What are the formalities to start the business? What are the formalities to start the business? So formalities, we refer to the documents, registration processes, legal procedures required to start and run a business. So we'll find that a sole trader usually requires few formalities, while a private company requires registration, record keeping, legal documentation. So that good people. That is that. So now let us move on. Now we move on to different forms of ownership. That is what we are going to talk about. Different forms of ownership. You know very well we have different forms of ownership. That is what we're talking about, the factors that you are to go through before you can go for any of those form of ownership. We have sole trader, we have partnership, close corporation, public, private company. So those are forms of what? Of business ownership. So let us move on to them. So like we have said, today we are going to be on sole trader. We are going to be on sole trader. So that is that. We are going to be on sole trader. So like it says, a sole trader is owned by one individual. Is owned by one individual. So one person can start a business. That is why we say it's a sole trader. So it can be started by one business. Like now we are going to come to characteristics of it. Not expensive to start. Not expensive to start. It means for you to start a sole trader, this requires what? Little money. This requires little money. Not expensive to start. It requires a little money and few legal procedures to begin operating. It requires little money and few legal procedures. It requires little money as well as few legal procedures. Legal procedures. That is what we are saying. It's not expensive, it's cheap. So that is that when you talk of what? A sole trader, one of the characteristics of it is that it is not expensive. So also it talks about any name as one of the characteristics. So it means the owner can choose any suitable business name. That is that. It means that owner, the owner can choose any suitable name. Any suitable name, provided it follows what? The legal requirements. That is that. Provided that it follows legal requirements. Can choose any name. Then one owner is one of its characteristics. One owner. The business belongs to one person only. The business belongs to one person only. That is that. Like we say, it's a sole trader, one individual. Then make all decisions. Make all decisions is one of the characteristics of a sole trader. So the owner has full control and decides how the business is run. The owner has full control. Has full control and decides how the business is run. How the business is run. That is that. So let us move on. Then it says receive all profits. receive all profits. All profits earned by business belong to the owner. All profits earned by the business belong to the owner. Belong to the owner. So that is that. Then no continuity. It's one of the characteristics of the sole trader. So it means that the business may close if owner die. The business may close if the owner dies or retires or leaves what? The business. Or leaves the business. So that is that. Then owner responsible for this. Owner responsible for this. So that is that. The owner must personally pay business debts. The owner must personally pay any business debts. Any business debts if the business cannot pay them. If the business cannot pay them. So these are the characteristics of a sole trader. So now let us go to the advantages of sole trader as well as their disadvantage. So let's first start by the advantage. As it says, easy and inexpensive to start. Easy and inexpensive to start. So it means that a sole trader business is simple to start and does not require a lot of money or complicated legal procedures. That is that. For example, Sipo can start a car wash business using 5,000 of his own savings. That is why we're saying easy and inexpensive to start. All profits belong to the owner. Meaning to say, after paying all business expenses, the owner keeps all the profits. For example, we can talk of Sipo again. Sipo's bakery makes profit of 10,000. She keeps the entire 10,000 for herself. You're not sharing it with anyone. Owner full control over business. Meaning to say, we're talking about the owner full control over the business. So it means that the owner makes all decisions without needing permission from anyone else. So that is that. Also, owner has a personal interest. So the owner is highly motivated because the success or failure of the business directly affects them. That is that. So now we have disadvantages of sole trader. Unlimited liability. That is the first disadvantage that we'll talk about. It means that the owner is personally responsible for all business debts and may lose personal belongings if the business cannot pay his debts. That is that. No legal entity. So the business and the owner are regarded as the same person in law. For example, if Peter's business is sued for unpaid debts, Peter can be sued personally as well. So that is that. No continuity. Remember we talked about this when we were talking about the characteristics. No continuity is disadvantaged because the business may stop operating if the owner dies, retires, or becomes unable to run it. So that is that. Thank you very much for your time. Make sure that you are going to share with others. Thank you.